Thank you, PY.
You are welcome.
Maintain the peace and the prosperity. And of course, as we are doing that maintaining, we do that by opening our mind to prosperity, which is what we are doing in our masterclass. Hello, welcome if you're joining us for the first time. We are in masterclass mode, so our service is a little different than it usually is. And we are studying Open Your Mind to Prosperity by Catherine Ponder. And so as we are getting ready for that and getting in that mode, I want to make sure everyone saw this question and pop this in the screen. You can absolutely share your thoughts and ideas in the comments. What was your biggest aha moment during week 6 or last week's masterclass? Did anything click about giving or tithing that you hadn't considered before? I think, as always, we see some things have already been shared. When you share these things in the comments, it actually will support others because you'll realize that you're not alone in what's been coming up for you and what's been showing up for you and what you're healing. So as you're continuing to post there, let's go ahead and get into the text. Now, we are in chapter 6. Chapter 6 is all about giving, the secret to permanent prosperity. And so we talked about a lot last week in terms of recognizing that we disagree with Catherine Ponder in terms of 10% or the 10th or 10 being a uniquely, specifically magic number. That is the number that everyone should use, right? What we know is that giving is powerful because if you always give, you always have, right? Giving is proof of having, and it's powerful when it is systematic and consistent. Now, if you have a firm belief around 10 or 10%, that's why it's going to work for you. We're going to read more stories of folks that tithe, that gave 10%. But remember, what's the principle? It is done unto you as you believe. So if you had only been taught that the magic was 3% or the magic was 5% or the magic was 20%, then that would have been what works for you. Also, as I've shared and shared many times, we know that the billionaire Warren Buffett, he actually gives 90% of his income. Now, he graduated to that, right? He didn't start there, but it would almost suggest, it's like, well, if this guy is giving 90%, then that must be the magic percentage to really make lots of money and attract more financial good into our lives. But we know that that's not possible for 99% of the planet, right? So I want to bring us back to the section where we left off. I want to start at the beginning of the section. When you cannot afford to tithe, I can just rename this, when you cannot afford to give, because there's a principle here. When we talk about the secret to permanent prosperity is absolutely giving. And as Catherine Ponder writes here, when you think you can't give, that's actually when you need to start looking for how to give, because if you always give, you always have, and giving is proof of having. So when you say, I cannot give, what you're doing is you're shutting down everything, essentially, right? You're making an agreement with lack. And so then there's no way that you can receive, right? There's no way that you can attract and call in new things. So giving is a demonstration that, oh, I believe that I can and will receive. Remember, it's like breathing. I exhale. That sets me up to inhale. Automatically, right? And so when you say I can't give or I cannot afford to give, you're unconsciously holding your breath metaphysically.
And I like the idea of replacing that word tithe with give, because it's more approachable. It takes all of the judgment and the past story around it away. And so that's a great way to consider it. Let's just let go of the word tithing. Just say giving.
Absolutely. Perhaps you are thinking, but I cannot afford to tithe. You cannot afford not to tithe. The greater the present financial necessity, the greater the need for immediately invoking 10, the magic number of increase. A businesswoman was in a financial bind. She had moved from one part of the country to another and had gone into a new line of work. It was paying off, but not fast enough to meet her many expenses. She practiced all the laws of prosperity in an effort to demonstrate immediate cash. Nothing happened until she remembered she had gotten careless about her tithing. She sat down and wrote out a tithe check for $50 and mailed it. The next day, she got additional calls for work that tided her over a period of financial strain, but nothing happened until she first tithed. Many years ago, I began thinking at a time when I felt I could not afford to tithe yet.
Again, tithing.
I began tithing at a time when I felt I could not afford to tithe, yet could not afford not to. Since my financial needs were so great, I decided to test 10, the magic number of increase. After reading the following account of how someone even more destitute than I had been prospered through tithing. A man who was $10,000 in debt with his credit gone and a wife and 4 children to provide for took a job as a day laborer in a mill, and with his family was compelled to live in a tent. He met 2 divinity students who convinced him that if he wanted to prosper again, he should tithe. The same week he began tithing, the company offered him one of its houses in which to live. Within a year, he was promoted to foreman. 10 years later, he was free from debt, the owner of a flourishing lumber company, a luxury car, an airplane, and other things on a similar scale. He attributes his success to first recognizing his debt to God and then faithfully tithing his income. I decided to try this prosperity formula of tithing, and it worked for me also. Again, the debt to God, and we don't actually have a debt to God, but in giving what we're doing, we're thinking God first, right? In giving, what we're recognizing is source first, that there's a source from which all things come. And so I do not limit my income to the resource of my job, to the resource of my jobs, right? To the resource of whatever my stream or streams of income are. I recognize that all of those are simply financial expressions of the infinite, ever-giving source. And so I put God first through my giving, and then I give faithfully, right? Whatever that amount is that I can commit to, that I've searched, I've looked, this is what really works with my financial plan, right? And then I give that consistently, no matter what. The benefit, this is obvious. This is the secret to permanent prosperity. Now, here's an interesting thing that Catherine Ponder talks about in this next session. Tithing your time isn't enough. A woman said, I don't see why I should tithe my money. I tithe my time to God's work. I'm a Sunday school teacher. I replied, that's fine, but what are you trying to demonstrate? More time or more money? Oh, I'd like to have more time, but I really need more money. I suggested that she check out the tithing promises in the Bible. They all spoke of tithing money and financial assets. Nowhere does the Bible talk about tithing one's time, commendable though that is. And so we actually received a question related to this in the Prosperity Circle. I absolutely agree with Catherine Ponder, specifically because of the role that money plays in our lives, right? And money is energetic. And so it's true that when we think about, particularly when we want to demonstrate money, and at some level, although it's true, and you've heard me say this many times, that when you give faithfully and systematically in this way, you're opening your life up to prosperity. So all sorts of good and wonderful things that are going to happen, not just financially. And it's important that you're not operating in manipulation. I'm giving $1,000 so I can get $10,000, or right? That's operating in manipulation. But it's very important to just acknowledge the way in which our beliefs are set up around money, right? And so it's really it's an avoidance. You're like, oh, well, you're right, I'm volunteering as a Sunday school teacher. I'm giving my time in this way. That should be enough. It's also true, particularly as she talks about giving as it relates in the Bible. As it relates in the Bible, all of the giving was at some level, it had some type of financial aspect to it, right? So even those that were giving and tithing of their animals, et cetera, their livestock, right? All of that was financial, or had a financial component. So that's very important if you are being inspired by some of the things that the scripture is talking about. We move on. A woman in Florida learned about tithing and began to tithe from her small retirement income. Immediately, she was offered part-time work and accepted it, tithing from it. Then she realized that the Bible spoke of tithing a tenth of everything. She had a savings account with $5,000 in it and decided that she should tithe from that as well. She then drew $500 out of her savings account and gave it to the church where she had learned about the great law of tithing. Soon she heard from the local Social Security board asking that she come in and see them. Her first reaction was one of fear. Now, what have I done wrong? But upon visiting them, she had a pleasant surprise. Rather apologetically, they said, "We owe you some money because of a new government regulation. The fact that you were born before a certain date means that we owe you $1,250. She said, "I'm getting a Social Security check every month. Thank you." "Yes, we know that, and you will continue doing so. Nevertheless, we owe you this additional sum." After the necessary paperwork was completed, she received a check. Another tither wondered why her savings account did not seem to grow. First, she would put money in it and then take money from it. Finally, it dawned on her that she was not tithing from the interest on that account. As she began tithing on her interest income, her savings began to grow steadily. I think this is important, and this is beautiful, beautiful to really think about, because we oftentimes limit and think about our income and what we're receiving to only our jobs, right? Our paychecks. If you have a business, however your income is, that we think of traditional income. And so we're giving based on that, but we forget all of the other ways that we're receiving, right? So if you have investment accounts, that's going to come up, I think, in the next story, right? If you have savings account and you have that interest, if you I learned this actually through Stratton Smith and his prosperity class, right? Even if you receive money as a gift, right? That's more income that's coming in. And so you have the opportunity to consider, how are you giving based on all of that receiving? This is also then where, for myself, I have my regular systematic giving. That's every Friday. I have it set as a recurring donation, right? So that happens no matter what. But then on a weekly basis, I'm making an assessment of what other places have I received, right? Or if I, signed a new client that I wasn't expecting to sign up in that month, right? That's income that was outside of what I was expecting, right? And so this is a beautiful thing to think about, right? I'm seeing the question, tithing from your savings, right? Simply means your interest, because interest is income, right? And so there's an opportunity to just look at that, whether it's on a quarterly basis, even if it's on an annual basis. And by putting God first, you're acknowledging I'm receiving, right? And this is a benefit to me. And so I must give. Because what I've learned and what I try to do as much as possible, it's like, as soon as I'm receiving whatever that is, gifts, dividends, interest, etc., I want to give as quickly as possible because I want to keep the gates open. Mm-hmm. Again, we think about breathing, inhale and exhale, and it's an automatic thing. So this is something that's helping to kind of expand your thinking, and particularly if you're feeling stuck financially, as in these stories where she talked about this one woman who, she was trying everything, and she really couldn't figure out what was going on, and she was doing all other kinds of, prosperity techniques and principles and tools. It may be, you may look at your life and your finances, and you're like, something's not working here. But you're giving regularly, you've been giving regularly, and then you realize, oh, but wait, I just, I received an unexpected check here. I have interest that I wasn't looking at. I have dividends that I wasn't looking at. And so that may be an opportunity for you to expand, because you want to acknowledge all of the ways that God's source is giving to and through you. So this next story aligns with that. Similarly, another tither worried because his investments did not seem to prosper him as they should, until he realized he was tithing from other channels of income, but it never tithed from his stocks. Now again, Catherine Ponder is using the word tithe. She's specifically talking about giving 10%. We do not in any way say that you need to give in that way, right? It's just whatever percentage you decide to give and want to give. But what's the principle here that's so important is essentially he was ignoring that he was receiving in a specific way, right? And God is the source of all. So he was giving, acknowledging, he had all of these channels of income, but he was like, oh, my stocks, that's not income, even though that's real money that he can use, right? So after tithing from his stock income, because, we pay taxes on that, right? Depending on what your accounting setup is. After tithing from his stock income, he felt guided to sell certain of his stocks and invest in others, which brought him a far more handsome income. This man no longer worries about the ups and downs of the stock market, but feels that with God as his financial partner, he will continue to be guided about his income from this channel. He continues to prosper. Withholding the tithe brings lack, right? I would retitle this and just say, withholding giving brings lack. Robert Letourneau, the engineering genius, became famous for his tithing. In his book, Mover of Men and Mountains, he speaks of the time after he started tithing when business was so good that one year he decided to hold on to his tithe. God, we have had a good year. Instead of giving you your tithe of 100,000, which the business owes you this year, I'm going to reinvest that 100,000 in the business, and you will get that tithe and much more next year. He suffered one financial reverse after another. Bad weather kept his construction work from going forward. At the end of the year, he was 100,000 in debt. He learned from that experience to never withhold the tithe and never to try to bargain with God about it. And reflecting upon the lesson he learned, he quipped, it is all right to give God credit, but he or God can also use cash. Later, Letourneau's tithes ran into the millions, and he had to form a private foundation just to handle the distribution of them. Here's another wonderful opportunity to inject some understanding, because this sounds punitive. And if you're like me, this is where I would like to, I think about my own experience, right? That I learned to be fearful of God. So as we talked about last week, there's the verse in Malachi, will a man rob God, right? And so the idea was, I don't want to rob God. And there's some energy of that here, right? That it's like, oh, he took away from God and so God punished him. So in metaphysics, we know that it all begins in mind, right? And thought creates thought creates experience. And so we have to look at the thinking behind the withholding. Because again, what we want to recognize, and this is how we keep the gate open, right? I talked about the idea of having a body of water, right, that allows fresh water to flow in and flow out versus a body of water that's closed, right, and doesn't have that inflow and outflow. And so what he was unconsciously doing was essentially putting a dam up, right, where he had a body of water where fresh water was flowing in and flowing out. And he was like, oh, I'm going to wait to let fresh water flow in and out a year from now, right? So if you set that dam and wait a year, what you're doing then is all of the benefits of the fresh inflow and outflow you're not going to have. And what happens in this metaphor when it's closed, it actually, things start to decay, right? Things start to rot. And so you have an unwanted experience. And so that's what was happening here. And it's very important to understand that there is a cause and effect based on the principle, not a cause and effect based on God punishing or judging you or this particular person.
And that's so important, because a lot of people have connected unconsciously their giving or not giving to this punitive nature of what they would call God. That's not how it operates. And so we are taking time to go through this chapter this way so that you can release any ideas that you've had about how you should give, the idea of what it looks like and what it's supposed to be. The thing that it's supposed to be, if there is anything, is consistent. Whatever that amount is. We're not here to tell you what that amount should be. Right. We're saying that energetically we want to keep the lines open, and so we decide a number, an amount, and we stick with it.
Yep.
But we also remember that God is not punishing us, and that's not what's happening when we withhold.
Right.
It's not like, oh, so you withheld from God, so God's going to withhold from you. That's not what we're talking about. So if you've believed that in the past, go ahead and free yourself of that.
Right. Right.
What the decision point is what can you lovingly give? What can you freely give? That's your number.
And again, to come back to the principle of it is done unto you as you believe, this is why your God concept is critical. Because as long as you believe that God is vengeful and punitive, which is not the truth of God, right, then that's going to be your experience of God. And so this is why at CSC we continue to teach a healed perspective of God. I encourage you to go back to last year's sermon series, April and May of last year. Tell me about your God, right? Where we break down the 7 aspects of God, which are radical, right, compared to the traditional view of God, and the traditional view that we're even reading in this story. And so this is also why we teach this book in this way, right? Not to teach it as absolute fact, right? Not to teach it as this is the way, but to offer some insight and to disagree where we disagree, and to be very clear why, with the goal of healing, with the goal of centering love, right? Embodying love is one of the things. It's literally one of the founding principles of our mission and vision statement. And so we're going to continue to do that. And so where something is unloving, we're going to name it, right? So that you don't operate from it.
And if this is your first time, as we've been going through this book chapter by chapter, last week was the first part of this chapter, and we did spend a lot of time breaking down, understanding, explaining, and debunking a lot of the things that were in the chapter. Not because, Catherine Ponder is bad or wrong, but because there's a deeper understanding that we wanted to make sure that you got, so that you can heal.
Absolutely. So we move forward. A salesman had prospered so much through tithing that he was trying to convince the owner of his company to tithe from company income. He wanted to know what to say to the boss. A friend suggested he remind his boss that many of the country's millionaires attribute their wealth to tithing. The Rockefellers, the Heinz people, the Quaker Oats people, the Kraft people, right? This is also true, again, as I mentioned, Warren Buffett and so many others. Tithing is a tried and true method in business. Where you give is important. It is important that you give where you are receiving spiritual help and inspiration. A woman once said, I have some apartments that I cannot keep rented, although I use all the prosperity laws, and don't tell me to tithe because I'm already doing that. Where are you tithing? I can't see that it is important where I tithe, so I give my tithe to the church I used to attend, but now I attend where I get far more inspiration. The answer was tithe where you are getting your help and inspiration if you wish to be prospered. It is inconsistent to do otherwise. To get spiritual help from one place and to tithe to another is like going to one doctor for help and trying to pay another, or like eating in one restaurant yet paying for your meal in another. Giving where you are receiving spiritual help and inspiration keeps you in touch with the flow of supply. And as you see, this is highlighted. I haven't highlighted much in this chapter, right? Because there's not much that we fully agree with. But this is an important principle, right? And we always say here at CSC, give where you're spiritually fed, right? So it's a beautiful way to just think about it and keep it centered, right? If you give where you're receiving spiritual help and inspiration, that keeps you in the flow of supply. Tithing heals. A woman started tithing for financial reasons and was prospered, but she had a surprise. For years, she had tried to lose weight and had been unable to do so. Yet when she started tithing, she tithed away 15 pounds. I want to say this now. I'm surprised I didn't remember to say this last week. As PY talked about, we say giving instead of tithing. But what we also recognize, and you can see it contextually here in the book, that tithing has become, in the way that it's being used here, and in many New Thought centers particularly, tithing is synonymous with giving. And so it's not even, when people are saying it, it's not even that you're talking about 10% as much as you're also just talking about giving, right? But I think it's important to separate that too, that because to say she tithed away 15 pounds doesn't make sense, right? Like I gave 10% and I gave away 15 pounds. Right? So she's using this language. Giving is a much better word, but we also acknowledge and can see where giving is being used as a synonym, or tithing is being used as a synonym for giving. Tithing helps free you from the negative experiences of life. A woman who is now in the millionaire bracket said, "When something negative happens to me, I know I have not given enough. A negative experience is always an indication to me to give. I ask, Father, what do I need to give? There is one basic problem in life, congestion. There is one solution, circulation." So again, this is important because this can be misused, but that's why I love how she sums it up in the principle of congestion and circulation. This thing, giving, that we're talking about, this secret to permanent prosperity, is the law of circulation. It's why we call our money currency. It needs to and is supposed to move, right? If you want to understand a little bit more about this, you can go back a few years back. I taught a sermon series, The Metaphysics of Money, right? And so one of the things that's important is to understand that there must be continuous flow, right? There must be flow. That's what prosperity is. And so whenever we feel congestion or constriction, just like that closed off body of water, right? The solution is to remove the dam and allow circulation of fresh water, right? So again, if you're seeing in your life, if you're feeling stuck, if you feel like I've been applying a bunch of other principles and I've been affirming and I've been visualizing and I may have a vision board or a wheel of fortune and I may have been writing things down, but you still feel that sense of congestion or constriction, look for ways that you may not be or you may not have been circulating. I'm reminded there's a song that Michael Jackson wrote, and this was after 9/11. The title of the song was "What More Can I Give?" And that's the title of that song, and the idea of that song was really recognizing that there was something happening in the world, and the response needed to be a giving, right? And this is interesting when you think about sort of geopolitical stances, right? There's an instinct to close off, right? There's an instinct to close your borders and shut off and make Muslims an other and be afraid of people. And he understood the principle to say, it's what more can I give? I need to open up. I need to allow circulation in this moment. And so that's what is absolutely the principle here under this idea of tithing heals. That's absolutely the principle here when we think about the stories that she's sharing. There's one basic problem in life, congestion. The solution is circulation. And so you may not, you want to ask yourself, maybe not, Father, what do I need to give? But you may want to ask yourself, where do I need to circulate? Where and how can I create circulation, right? Where do I need to exhale, right, so that I can inhale, right, and then continue that process? If your financial affairs have stagnated into indebtedness, hard times, and constant problems, you can clear up the congestion through beginning to trust God to help you through your act of tithing to God. Tithing is an act of faith that brings about circulation and dissolves congestion. A man in New York City wrote, "My first tithe took away a strange circulatory ailment which defied medical help." Then he made a confession. "It took me 3 years to change my thinking so that I was able to tithe. I had always skipped the chapters on tithing in your books. Now I am dumbfounded by the immediate disappearance of that constant dreadful pain in my right leg and foot, thanks to giving the first tithe of my life." And this is also interesting when we think about, again, how regular giving, how circulation or the lack of circulation can show up in our body, and how when we do something in the external, it can impact the internal. A man in the real estate business in Southern California got careless in the distribution of his tithes and learned quite a lesson. One month he gave his tithe to a problem-prone relative rather than giving it to his church. Everything went wrong. His bank account got mixed up and a number of checks bounced. A real estate deal from which he expected a commission of several $1,000s did not go through. Other channels of supply simply dried up and he was left in a financial bind. Everything stagnated until he again put God and not a problem-prone relative first financially. This, again, is interesting. Again, cause and effect. Principle, not God punishing, right? However, it's what we get to this last piece about what are you putting first financially, right? So are you putting the focus of your attention and your mind on the reality of your connection to source that's eternal? And so I'm giving from that place, or are you putting the first focus of your attention on maybe helping a relative in this case? And I would think there was probably a whole lot of other thinking around judgment and wanting to be a good family member. And, there's probably so many other things going on that compelled him to do this in this way,
right? And
which is putting all of that other stuff first.
Right. And that's the energy in which you give, right? If there's unconscious guilt or shame or doubt or worry or even anger in the way in which you give, then it creates that environment by which you get to see what you really think. It's not God punishing you. By no means would God ever be punitive. And so we keep saying that because we know that many of us have been, including us, were trained to believe that God would punish us if we did or didn't do certain things. Mm-hmm. It's not what's happening. It's cause and effect. The thoughts that we think create the experiences that we have. Mm-hmm. And if our thinking unconsciously has been around lack or limitation or guilt or shame about where I stand in life, then I get to see those experiences. That's it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is it. You Absolutely. Change how you think about it, you change what you experience. Mm-hmm. That's it. Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds so simple that you feel like you want it to be more complex. Mm-hmm. But that wouldn't be loving and kind either. Absolutely. So the principles are simple. Yeah. Now, sometimes they're not easy to apply because we already have these beliefs about certain things that we got to get rid of first. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There is nothing wrong in giving to one in need. So there's the other part that's important, right? Because wait, but if somebody needs something, there's nothing wrong with giving to one in need if you are careful what you give. But by giving only money, you offer only temporary help and therefore possibly keep them in poverty. It's far wiser to give them literature on how to use the laws of prosperity for themselves. This will prosper them permanently and make them independent of poverty programs or handouts. Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach him how to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. So here's, again, where we disagree with Catherine Ponder, because I think it's so very, very important. And again, I think this is a valid critique of New Thought and why we practice differently at Celebration Spiritual Center is that if someone's in need, we address the need. They can't hear you. They ain't going to read that damn book.
Exactly.
Right?
Right. If they need... If they're starving, that's not going to do anything. Right. There's a hierarchy of needs for a reason. Exactly. Right? Our base needs have to be met. Mm-hmm. And if someone's in need, then you feed them.
Exactly. And then to the extent that that person is open, available after that point, there may be an opportunity for a conversation or sharing. But if not, all good. Move on. Right? Move on in the sense of that was your only... You were in that person's life to support them in meeting that specific need and support them in getting that meal, right? There's the wonderful parable, and this was something that was in the central in seminary, right? The parable of the sower. You don't know who you are or where you are on a person's journey, right? Mm-hmm. Some people till the soil, some people plant the seed, right? Some people are watering the seed, some people are taking care of it as it bursts forth as a little shoot and then begins to grow, right? Some people then are the ones that pick the fruit or prune the tree, right? So you don't know where you were on that person's journey. It may not be that you're supposed to give them the book, right? So, it just needed to be said.
And I'm so glad we get the opportunity to go through this book line by line and to to clarify and correct and support you in seeing it differently. We're not throwing away the book. We've said that several weeks in a row.
Right.
What we are doing is pointing out what, in terms of law and principle, is correct. And we're also helping you understand how we differ and how literal interpretations of things don't work.
The ancient laws on tithing were very definite about where the tithe was to be given. I just want to say this again, because again, we talked about this last week. The ancient laws on tithing are not definite and are not for us, right? So we talked about this last week. It cannot be said enough, right? So yes, it was definite about where it should be given for that group of people that lived at that time, right? There is no temple. One, we're not Jews or practicing Jews, right? So there is no temple for us to give to in terms of where it was to be given. So it's a mistake and a misnomer to even think about it in that way. If you look in the Second Testament, like what was the early church? They were not practicing Jews again, so they were not giving in the same way. But it was actually it was more of a community, and so you were giving to the community, right? And so you shared meals together, etc., and made sure that everyone in the community had what they needed. The first tenth went to the priests in place of worship. The tithe was given impersonally. The giver had no say about how it was to be spent. The second was a festival tithe. The third, a charity tithe. And so what priests and temple are we giving to, right? Festival tithe, charity. Like, this is why we started this chapter by really calling this out and understanding why it's problematic to try to say that indeed this is how we must give. But again, is there a principle in giving that is necessary? Absolutely. And that's what we're focusing on, the principle. She goes on, if you are giving several tenths of your income rather than only 1/10, then you may feel freer with your second and third tithe. But your first tithe should be given impersonally to God's work with no stipulation as to how it is to be spent by the recipient. Again, second and third tithe, ain't nobody doing that, right? Ain't nobody doing that. We do not teach that. We do not advocate that. It's highly problematic, right? Highly, highly, highly problematic. At CSC, as you give, you receive. Give what feels good. End of discussion.
End of discussion.
Where you give your money is where you give your faith. A woman had long been in ill health, gave her money generously to several medical funds, yet could not understand why the prayers of her minister and prayer group had not healed her. She had not identified financially with her church and its prayers for her. She had identified financially with heart trouble, cancer, polio, and many of the world's ills through her giving. That was where she gave her money, and that was where her faith was. She needed to go all the way with God in her giving if she wanted God to go all the way in her healing. Again, I want to point this out. This has so much to do with the principle, as a person thinketh, so are they, right? The principle, it is done unto you as you believe. And so clearly she was receiving the fruit of her beliefs, the fruit of her thinking. It wasn't that God was refusing to go all the way with her. That's not what was happening. But we can see how she had directed her mind in a certain direction, and she had directed her thinking in a certain direction and was giving in this way. I also think this is helpful when you start to think about organizations that you choose to support in your giving, right? Whether that's a spiritual organization or philanthropically, right? You want to make sure that the work of that organization wholly aligns with the life that you want to experience, wholly aligns with the world that you want to live in truly, because you may be unknowingly contributing to something on an unconscious level or on a metaphysical level that would create something that you would never want to experience in your life. There are plenty of people in the world today who have no spiritual faith or religious affiliation yet want to give. Perhaps it is a step forward for them to support medical funds as well as educational, cultural, civic, and community projects. They need to be giving, and that is the level of their understanding. So that is the level of their giving. That sounds very judgmental. That's all I can say about that. But the sooner you evolve out of that level to a more expanded level of giving, I don't think there's an either or, right? I give philanthropically. There are lots of organizations that I and we support, and we also give from a spiritual perspective, right? And so I think it's not an either or, right? To those people and organizations that inspire and uplift humankind spiritually, the sooner you will help humankind find the truth that heals and prospers. If the truth movement were properly supported, its teaching would reach millions through the mass media and wipe out disease and poverty. Right. That's an interesting statement. I highlighted it to the point that I do believe that, the New Thought movement, it's still a hidden in plain sight movement. Right. And so I think if more people supported New Thought and were aware of New Thought, right, it would do so much good in the world. Emmett Fox put it succinctly: the truth movement is the only thing that can save the world from its ills. Everything else has already been tried. Again, that's Emmett Fox's words. The Internal Revenue Service allows you to tithe up to half of your adjusted income. A lawyer who tithes a tenth of his legal income before expenses has said, if I don't give it to God's work, I've got to give it in taxes. Since I do not get to keep it, I prefer to give it where it will help and spiritually inspire many people. That's just a practical perspective that, is just true, right? This man has prospered incredibly. I think let's read this last section before we close. Gross or net? Sometimes people ask, should I tithe gross or net? A friend said, I tried tithing net after taxes, but found I never had money enough to pay my taxes. When I went all the way with God and tithed gross before taxes, there was always money to pay my taxes. Tithing gross took the strain off of my financial affairs all the way around. If you are not free to tithe from all channels of income, start tithing from one channel. If you do not feel guided to tithe gross, begin tithing net. The important thing is to begin invoking 10, the magic number of increase, in some way. Expanded results will justify expanded giving. So again, and this is where I think Catherine Ponder gets a little slippery, because so you can be guided gross or net, but 10 is absolute, right? Stretton Smith in the 4Ts Prosperity Program, he advises entrepreneurs and business owners to tithe net, right, or to give from the net. So that's something to think about, and that's something I always advocate for business owners. But really, that's up to you, right? How you choose to give, right? If you're giving, if you're looking at your net income or you're looking at your gross income, even Catherine Binder says it's up to you, right? Be guided. And I'm laughing because at the same time, she seems to feel there's so much absolutes. I do want to just highlight in the summary, because I think it's important to just remember the principles. And she really shares the principles here, right? Number 3, systematic giving opens the way to systematic receiving. If you always give, you will always have. That's the principle. Not if you always give 10%, you will always have, right? Just if you always give, because that's keeping circulation, right?
And you can't give what you don't have. And so in your consciousness, the idea I'm giving means I have something. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not in the lack consciousness around I don't have, mm-hmm. I don't have, mm-hmm. I don't have, I don't have. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't matter the amount, but it's the understanding that as I'm giving, that means I have something mm-hmm. to give. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And then number 4, giving and sharing are always the first steps to permanent, enduring financial increase. And that's absolutely true. Another way to think about it, if my hand is closed, that means nothing can be put in it, right? And so that's why when I give, I have to open my hand, but it's now also put my hand in the posture for something to be placed in it, right? And so that's why this is a secret to permanent prosperity, to permanent financial increase. You got to keep that flow, just like you got to keep the flow of breath, right? Just like rivers keep that flow of fresh water coming in and out, right? That's what's necessary. And that's what this principle of giving is all about. So we're closing on this chapter. Next week, we're going to move into the next chapter. This is also will then be the second part of the book where she talks about other ways to demonstrate prosperity as we begin chapter 7. So we encourage you this week to reread chapter 6. Send us your questions. You can send in questions to truthsunday@celebrationsc.org. Continue to practice these principles, not just giving, as we've been talking about so many principles, right? So we recognize that there's release and elimination that's necessary, that helps us open our mind to prosperity. We recognize we create our prosperity mentally first, right? Through writing, through speaking, through pictures, visualization, imagination, etc. So we continue to do all of these things, and we bring this together. That's what creates the prosperous life of happiness, radiant health, success, and money. So in this moment, it is time for giving here at CSC. And of course, it is very easy to give to CSC. You can go to our website, celebrationsc.org/give, or you can text your dollar amount to 347-744-9500. There is a $10 minimum for text to give for that service. But no matter which method you use, we here at CSC will always remind you, as you give, you receive. So give what feels good. Search your heart and mind and think about, what is that number? What's that number that works with my financial plan, right? You're not beholden to a percentage. God is not requiring you to tithe 10%. You're not beholden to what's written in the First Testament of the Bible or the Second Testament of the Bible. But there is a principle around giving. It's a spiritual principle, and we are all experiencers of it to the level of our awareness. We all experience this principle because it's just like breathing. If I hold my breath for long enough, I'm going to have unwanted effects. But as soon as I release the breath, I then put myself in the posture and position to receive a new breath. And of course, living means breathing in and out over and over and over unconsciously. And so we have the same opportunity to live in that posture with our giving. And when we do that, then we can affirm with confidence and with joy, all the money that I circulate, returns to me multiplied. In a never-ending cycle. Of increase. And enjoyment. To that we say amen. Ashe. And so it is. Yes, yes. Well, we love and appreciate you all. We're grateful for you all being here, for endeavoring to learn these principles, embody and practice these principles, and make it the truth of your life. We see and know that you are prospering in so many different ways, and we look forward to hearing even more from each of you, how you are prospering as a result of this masterclass. We look forward to you joining us on Wednesday for the Momentum Prayer Call. And next Sunday is the third Sunday. Next Sunday is God Talk Sunday. And we look forward to you being there with us. Remember, no question is off limits, but you got to be in the room. And so you have to be on our mailing list to get that Zoom link and password.
Absolutely. We love you all. Shout out to the Prosperity Circle. We'll see you in the circle. Mm-hmm. And just to say, we love you all. Mm-hmm. Unconditionally.
Absolutely.
That hasn't changed, and it will not change.
Absolutely.
But you got to love yourself first.
Hey, talk about it. All right, y'all. Have an amazing rest of your Sunday. Bye for now.